Have you ever felt invisible? Picture this. You're standing in a room full of people who used to be your whole world, watching your ex-husband parade his younger, shinier wife around like a prize. You can feel the whispers, the sideways glances, the quiet pity. You feel like yesterday's headline, already forgotten. That was Nora Hale's reality. A woman discarded for an upgraded model. But what happens when the most powerful, untouchable man in the city, a billionaire no one can get close to, walks past everyone, looks straight at you, and changes the course of your life with a single, deliberate kiss in front of everyone? This isn't just a revenge story. It's the moment a woman who thought she was finished remembers her power, while the man who threw her away is forced to watch her rise. The invitation had arrived a week earlier. It sat on Nora's reclaimed wood coffee table, a thick piece of ivory cardstock that felt oddly heavy for its size. Gold lettering shimmered, Metropolitan Foundation Annual Gala. A world she had once lived in, or rather, a world that had belonged to her ex-husband, Ethan Ward. Nora ran her thumb along the sharp edge of the card. For 5 years, that gala had been a fixed point in her life. A night of borrowed diamonds, tight smiles, and standing silently at Ethan's side while he worked the room. She had been Mrs. Ethan Ward then, the quiet, tasteful ornament attached to an investment banker on a rapid rise. Her own career, landscape architecture, had been gently nudged into the background. A nice little hobby, he'd called it, something to keep her entertained while he built their future. After the divorce, she learned that their future had been entirely his. Now, a year later, the invitation felt like a dare. Her small freelance studio was finally picking up. She had a handful of regular clients who loved her thoughtful, sustainable garden designs. She was paying her own bills, watering her own plants, sleeping diagonally in a bed that belonged only to her. She was healing. But was she healed enough? "You should go," her friend Jenna had urged over the phone. "You need to walk into that room like you still own oxygen. Show him you're not just surviving, you're thriving." Thriving felt ambitious. Most days, just breathing without crying felt like an achievement. But Jenna had a point. Hiding felt like letting Ethan win. So Nora had taken out the one dress Ethan had always hated. It was a deep emerald silk slip that skimmed and flowed in a way he'd called too much for a banker's wife. It was unapologetically hers. Tonight she wouldn't be Mrs. Ward. Tonight she'd simply be Nora Hale. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel glittered. Crystal chandeliers, glowing sconces, champagne and money everywhere. The air hummed with ego and influence. Nora accepted a champagne flute from a passing waiter, the bubbles prickling on her tongue. She lingered near the edges of the room, orbiting the crowd like a quiet satellite. Familiar faces glanced her way, brief flickers of recognition, maybe curiosity, maybe pity, before shifting on to more important people. She was old gossip no one bothered to retell. And then she saw them. Ethan stood at the base of the marble staircase like a king surrounded by courtiers. He looked almost exactly the same. Perfect tux, confident smile that never quite reached his eyes. The woman on his arm, though, was new. Lila Carrington. Nora knew of her, of course. Daughter of a real estate mogul, 24. Flawless face like a porcelain doll. Eyes sharp with possession. The diamond on her finger was enormous, catching the light and shattering it into 100 rainbows. It was twice the size of the ring Ethan had given Nora. Her breath caught. She had prepared herself for this moment, practiced a cool, detached smile in the mirror. But the reality, the obvious upgrade, hit like a punch to the gut. Lila laughed, her tinkling giggle carrying across the room, and leaned in to whisper something in Ethan's ear. He smirked, scanning the crowd with smug ownership. Their eyes met. Across the glittering sea of gowns and tuxedos, Ethan saw her. The smirk stayed, but something flickered beneath it. Annoyance? Surprise? Irritation? He held her gaze a second too long, silently acknowledging the minefield of history between them, then turned away, giving all his attention back to Lila. Just like that, he dismissed her. The cut was so clean, it stole the air from Nora's lungs. She had been the woman who straightened that tie, who reminded him of colleagues' spouses' names, who patched up his ego after rough days. Now she was a stranger in a green dress. Jenna was wrong, Nora thought bitterly. Coming here wasn't a triumph. It was a self-inflicted wound. Clutching her small evening bag, she turned, searching for a quiet place to pull herself together. From Ethan Ward's point of view, the night was going according to plan. The champagne was perfect, the air smelled like success, and Lila, his polished, pedigreed wife, was a beautiful weight on his arm. At 35, a senior VP at a major firm and married into a powerful family dynasty, he felt like a man who had played the game and won. Seeing Nora was an unwelcome complication. She stood alone near the bar, the same woman he'd once considered good enough for the early stages of his career, now stunning in that ridiculous green dress he'd once argued with her about. It hugged the elegant lines of her body, exposed the curve of her back. It was a dress for an artist, not a corporate wife. For a moment, a ghost from the past surfaced. Nora years ago, sketching with black charcoal smudged on her fingers, eyes bright as she talked about community gardens and regenerative landscapes. Over time, he'd quietly smothered that spark. He shoved the memory aside. He had chosen wisely, he told himself. Nora had been the starter wife, the one suitable for his initial ascent. But breaking into the real elite circles required someone like Lila, a statement wife. Her father had opened doors Ethan could never have reached alone. Their marriage was a merger, and the returns had been excellent. Who is that? Lila's soft voice sliced through his thoughts, loaded with steel. Her gaze was fixed on Nora. No one important, Ethan answered too quickly. Just my ex. Lila's perfect brows arched. That's her? The gardener? Ethan flinched. Landscape architect, he corrected automatically. It was just a hobby. Well, she's here alone. Lila's grip tightened on his arm. Are you going to say hello? It would be rude not to. What she meant was, I want to see her up close. I want to evaluate the threat. He knew it was a test. Ignoring Nora would imply she still had power over him. Approaching her would prove how utterly indifferent he was. Of course, he said smoothly. He led Lila across the ballroom, feeling the shift in attention as people watched them. They were the power couple of the night. The approach felt like a victory lap. Nora, he said, his tone a polished blend of surprise and condescension. I didn't expect to see you here. She turned, her face composed in a mask of polite neutrality. Her warm brown eyes met his, and for a heartbeat he felt that old, unspoken understanding of years together. Ethan, Lila, you make a lovely couple, she said evenly. Thank you, Lila chirped, her smile brilliant and razor-edged. She extended her hand, the enormous diamond practically winking. It's so brave of you to come to these events alone. I'd be so uncomfortable without someone to lean on. A perfectly delivered insult wrapped in concern. Nora's hand was steady as she shook hers. I'm here as a guest of the foundation, she replied calmly. They're considering a collaboration with me for the new conservatory gardens. Ethan's smile tightened. Collaboration? Her? It had to be an exaggeration, some pathetic attempt to save face. That's nice, he said dismissively. Good for you, keeping busy with your little garden business. The words hung in the air, poisoned with contempt. He saw a flicker of pain in her eyes. but it vanished, replaced by cool, steady calm. "It's more than a business, Ethan. It's my work," she answered quietly but firmly. "Something I don't expect you to understand." The sharpness of the retort startled him. The Nora he remembered would have swallowed the insult and changed the subject. Before he could come up with something cutting to say, she gave them a small nod. "Enjoy your evening." She turned away, emerald silk shimmering under the chandeliers. Ethan watched her walk off, a bitter taste in his mouth. Somehow, that encounter hadn't given him the satisfaction he'd anticipated. Instead, something ugly and unsettled gnawed at him. He'd meant to show her what she'd lost. Instead, seeing her walk away, composed and unbroken, left him with the disturbing feeling that he was the one miscalculating. The balcony felt like another world. Nora slipped through the heavy glass doors into the cool night air. The roar of the city below softened into a distant murmur. Central Park stretched out like a dark, quiet sea under the stars. She leaned on the cold stone railing and took long, shaking breaths, willing the tears pressing at the back of her eyes to retreat. "Little garden business." His words echoed in her head. He'd always made her work sound small, trivial. For years she'd believed him. She'd allowed herself to shrink to fit the decorative box he'd built around her. A voice broke the silence beside her. "The Versailles-style theme for the rooftop garden is a bit on the nose, don't you think?" Startled, Nora turned. A man stood a short distance away, leaning casually on the railing. His tuxedo fit perfectly, but he wore it like an afterthought. Tall, dark hair, striking gray eyes that seemed to quietly take in everything. She didn't recognize him, but there was an unmistakable aura of authority about him. The kind that didn't need to announce itself. "A little," she replied, finding her voice. "All that rigid geometry. It feels like nature being forced into obedience." His lips curved in a small smile. "Exactly. There's no mystery. The garden tells you everything at first glance. No surprises." He paused, studying her. "Not like your Wandering Wildlands project." Nora froze. "I'm sorry." "What?" "Your university thesis," he clarified. "The public park design based on regenerative wilderness principles. Winding paths, hidden clearings, native species. A landscape that reveals itself slowly." He tilted his head, thoughtful. "I remember the drawings. They were extraordinary." Nora stared, stunned. No one had mentioned that project in over 10 years. It belonged to a version of herself she'd mostly buried. "How do you even know about that?" she whispered. He gave a small shrug. "I make it my business to notice brilliant things." He extended a hand. "Adrian Cole." The name hit her like an electric shock. Adrian Cole. The elusive tech billionaire who'd revolutionized data security. The man the financial press talked about like a myth. Famously private, rarely photographed. And he was standing here, on a balcony, talking to her about a student project from 12 years ago. "Nora Hale," she managed, placing her hand in his. His grip was warm, firm. "I know," he said easily, his gray eyes never leaving hers. "I was a judge for the National Student Design Competition that year. Your project should have won. It was risky. It had heart." Nora's mind reeled. She'd come in second. At the time, it had stung. One of many small sacrifices she'd made as she settled into Ethan's idea of their life together. He'd called her ambitions unrealistic. You were a judge?" "A quiet one," Adrian replied. "I funded the grant. My younger sister was studying architecture then. She was obsessed with your work. She said, 'Nora Hale designs like she's listening. Her spaces care about people.'" He looked out over the park, a shadow crossing his face. "She believed design should serve communities, not egos. She would have loved what you're doing now." The encounter with Ethan and Lila had been built to crush her. to make her feel small and worthless. Yet here was Adrian Cole, a man whose influence stretched across industries, reminding her of the passion and value she'd thought she'd lost. He hadn't mentioned Ethan. He hadn't offered her pity. He saw her as what she truly was, a creator. "Thank you," she said softly. "No one's talked about my work like that in a very long time." "Then they haven't been paying attention," he replied. They stood together in companionable silence for a while, the city lights glittering below them. For the first time that night, Nora's shoulders eased. The tight knot of humiliation in her stomach began to loosen. Adrian wasn't just a distraction. He felt like a lighthouse, throwing light on a shore she'd forgotten existed, the one she'd once dreamed of reaching on her own 2 feet. Inside, Ethan was in his element, holding court with a group of associates, a glass of expensive whiskey in hand. He started in on a story about a recent acquisition, laughter and admiration circling around him. But his gaze kept drifting. He told himself he was just making sure Nora had the decency to leave early, that she wasn't hanging around embarrassing herself. But the truth was less flattering. He was rattled. The Nora he remembered would have been shaking, maybe even crying. This Nora had stood her ground. She'd thrown his words back at him. Then he saw her, on the balcony. And she wasn't alone. Adrian Cole stood beside her. Ethan's story died mid-sentence. One of his colleagues, Ryan, followed his line of sight. "Is that Cole?" Ryan breathed. "I didn't even know he was here. Who's he with?" "My ex-wife," Ethan replied, and the words tasted like ash. The small group fell silent. The shift in power was immediate. Ethan was no longer the brightest star in their sky. Adrian Cole was. Everyone else was just orbiting. "What is Cole doing with her?" Lila hissed at his side, having appeared out of nowhere. Her doll-like face was tight with alarm. "Ethan, do you understand who that is? My father has been trying to get a meeting with him for 6 months, and he's out there talking to your gardener." "She's not my gardener," Ethan snapped, anger flaring, "and I have no idea what he wants with her." His insides twisted. Had Nora told some sob story about their marriage? Was she trying to undermine his reputation? His mind raced through worst-case scenarios. They weren't just talking. Nora was smiling. A real, unguarded smile he hadn't seen in years. The one she used to wear when she was knee-deep in a design she loved. Adrian was listening, fully focused on her, as if the rest of the world didn't exist. They looked comfortable, almost intimate. Something primal and ugly rose in Ethan's chest, jealousy, sharp and irrational. He didn't want Nora, he told himself. He had Lila, the ultimate status symbol, but seeing the woman he'd dismissed as insignificant treated as an equal, adored, by a man like Adrian Cole, felt like a personal insult. It shattered the story he'd been telling himself for years, that he'd traded up, that he'd won. He watched as Nora and Adrian stepped back inside and headed toward the grand foyer. When they paused, Ethan found himself holding his breath, hoping they'd split off in different directions. Instead, Adrian lightly touched Nora's arm. He said something only she could hear. Then, beneath the blazing chandeliers, in front of politicians, socialites, and reporters, Adrian Cole bent his head and kissed Nora Hale. It wasn't passionate or frantic. It was slow, intentional, deeply tender, a kiss that said, "You matter." Conversations died mid-word. The room sucked in a collective breath. Camera flashes that had been pointed at celebrities whirled to capture them instead, firing in a storm of light. Ethan went numb. The glass in his hand slipped slightly, slick with sweat. His vision tunneled until the only thing he could see was that kiss. He watched the woman he'd belittled and discarded being publicly cherished by a man whose power made his own seem laughable. When the kiss ended, Adrian rested his hand on the small of Nora's back, guiding her toward the exit, shielding her from the chaos of attention. Ethan's meticulously constructed world, built on image, control, and other people's perception, didn't just crack, it shattered. In that moment, he wasn't Ethan Ward, successful financier. He was just the man who had let Nora Hale go. The fool who'd thrown away a diamond, convinced it was a worthless stone. The next morning, everything was different. Nora's face was splashed across society blogs and gossip sites. Billionaire Adrian Cole's mystery woman, screamed one headline. Cole's shock kiss at gala, declared another. Her phone buzzed nonstop on the nightstand, vibrating like an angry insect. She'd switched it to silent, burying herself under the covers as if the duvet could muffle the noise of the entire city talking about her. She felt nauseous with embarrassment at the public spectacle, jittery about the unwanted attention. And yet, underneath, there was something else, a spark of power. No one was looking at her like the pitiful ex-wife anymore. No one was calling her Ethan's ex. Now, to the outside world, she was Adrian Cole's mystery woman. Just after 9, a new text appeared. Unknown number. Nora, I owe you an apology for the scene I caused and an explanation. Would you have dinner with me tonight? AC. Her fingers trembled as she typed a single word. Yes. He didn't take her to a glamorous restaurant where they'd be photographed. Instead, a discreet car picked her up and brought her to a quiet brownstone in the West Village, his home. Inside, the place was warm and lived in. Bookshelves stacked high, modern art that actually looked chosen, not staged. Not the sterile billionaire lair she'd secretly imagined. They ate at a simple wooden table in a real kitchen. A chef named Diego prepared a rich, comforting pasta and then disappeared, leaving them alone. No pretense tonight, Adrian said, setting down his wine glass. First, I need to say this. I am truly sorry. I put you in an impossible position last night. It was impulsive and unfair. Nora met his gaze. Then why did you do it? He didn't look away. I told you about my sister, Emma, he said quietly. She was 2 years behind you at Columbia. She followed your work religiously. She used to say Nora Hale designs with empathy. She builds places that heal people. Grief briefly passed over his face. Emma died in a car accident a few months after that competition, he continued. Losing her, it hollowed me out. When I sold my first company, I started a foundation in her name, the Emma Cole Foundation. It supports women architects and designers creating public, community-centered spaces. The work she dreamed of doing. The work you do. Nora swallowed hard, her heart aching. I've kept tabs on your career, he went on. Or rather, how it stalled. I watched you get early recognition and then vanish after you married Ethan Ward. Your talent disappeared behind someone else's story. He leaned forward, his voice slowing. I saw you last night, alone. I watched him walk up to you with his new wife on his arm. I saw that smug little look of superiority, the way he tried to make you feel small, and I was furious. I've seen that look my entire life. Men telling women with their words or their eyes that their ideas are cute but not serious. He exhaled. I felt this protective rage. For you. For Emma. For every woman I've watched get minimized. And the kiss? Nora asked gently. It was 2 things, he said. Part of it was human. I wanted the woman I saw on that balcony, a woman of depth and brilliance, to know she'd been noticed, that she mattered. The other part, he gave a crooked, self-aware smile, was strategic. I knew a single photograph would change your narrative. You'd no longer belong in Ethan Ward's story as a sad line in his bio. You'd have your own story, a clean public break. His eyes searched hers. It was a gamble, bold and maybe arrogant, but my intentions were sincere. I want to help you reclaim what was taken from you." He took a breath. "The foundation is planning a flagship project, the Emma Cole Memorial Garden in Brooklyn Bridge Park. We need a lead designer." He held her gaze. "I want it to be you, Nora." Her mind went blank. It was the kind of commission architects fantasize about, a project that could define a career. He wasn't tossing her a favor. He was offering her a platform to build the life she'd always wanted. The kiss, she realized, hadn't been about claiming ownership. It had been the opening of a door. For the first time in years, Nora felt solid ground beneath her feet, ground she'd shaped herself. The tears in her eyes weren't from humiliation this time. They were from immense, overwhelming relief. The photo of that kiss was a bomb in the middle of Ethan Ward's carefully curated life. The explosion was immediate. On Monday morning, he was summoned to the office of his boss, Martin Graves, a man whose approval Ethan had chased for years. Ethan walked in, expecting congratulations on a recent big deal. Martin didn't offer a handshake. A copy of the New York Post lay on his desk. The photo of Nora and Adrian took up half the front page. "I got a call from Cole's office this morning," Martin said, voice dangerously calm. "They're pulling their accounts, all of them. That's a 9-figure portfolio gone. No explanation, just a change in direction." Martin's eyes sharpened. Any idea why that might be? Ethan felt his blood drain. "Martin, this has nothing to do with me. That's my ex-wife." "Is it?" Martin leaned back, icy. "Because the street is buzzing. The same weekend Cole kisses your ex-wife, he guts our accounts. People are talking. You know what they're saying? That you look weak. That if you can't manage your own house, maybe you can't be trusted with theirs." The message was clear. Ethan was no longer an asset. He was a liability, and work was only the beginning. At home, the atmosphere turned glacial. Lila, who'd once looked up at him with wide, admiring eyes, now glared at him like he was something stuck to her shoe. "This is a catastrophe," she snapped one night, tossing her iPad onto their immaculate white sofa. On the screen, an article about Nora's appointment as lead architect for the Emma Cole Memorial Garden. "She's everywhere. They're calling her his muse. You told me she was no one. You told me she was just a hobbyist gardener. How was I supposed to know she knew Adrian Cole?" Ethan exploded, raw nerves fraying. "That's exactly the problem," Lila shot back, pacing their pristine, soulless living room. "You don't know anything. I married you because you were powerful, because you were going places, because you were supposed to elevate the Carrington name, not drag it through the mud with your pathetic divorce drama. My father is furious. People are laughing at us." The words hit harder than any headline. "I married you because you were powerful." Their relationship, stripped down to its bones, was a transaction, and his stock was plummeting. Their fights became routine, meaner each time. She mocked his shrinking status at work. He called her shallow and spoiled. The picture-perfect facade of their life crumbled, revealing nothing underneath but resentment. He started drinking more. At night, alone in his study, he scrolled through article after article about Nora and Adrian. Photos of them at the garden site, walking through muddy ground, deep in conversation. They looked like partners, equals. Articles praised Nora's visionary designs, her resilience, her passion. He remembered a night years ago when she'd excitedly shown him a proposal for a community garden in a low-income neighborhood. She'd glowed as she explained it. He hadn't even looked at it properly. "There's no money in that," he'd muttered, eyes on his market reports. "Focus on the house." Now, the work he'd dismissed was being funded by a billionaire and celebrated by the city. He'd thought power meant money, status, control. Watching Nora step into her own power, he began to realize he'd been wrong all along. The site for the Emma Cole Memorial Garden was a neglected stretch of waterfront in Brooklyn Bridge Park. 2 scruffy acres of weeds, cracked pavement, and forgotten potential. To Nora, it was perfect. A blank canvas, a promise. She threw herself into the project with an intensity she hadn't felt since her 20s. The woman who had once tiptoed around Ethan's ego was gone, replaced by someone who took up her own space without apologizing for it. She spent her days on site, boots muddy, hair in a messy bun, talking with engineers and foremen, sketching in the margins of blueprints. Her nights were spent hunched over her drafting table, surrounded by drawings, plant lists, and soil analyses, fueled by coffee and a long-suppressed joy. The design she created was the opposite of the rigid, symmetrical show gardens of the wealthy elite. Inspired by her old wandering wildlands concept, it was more confident now, more assured. A garden for healing. Curving, accessible paths invited visitors to wander and pause. There was a sensory garden for children with disabilities, a meadow bursting with native wildflowers for pollinators, and quiet pockets with benches made from reclaimed wood for anyone needing a moment to breathe. At the center, a simple fountain murmured gently, a symbol of resilience and continuity. Adrian was a steady presence, never hovering, always respectful. He visited often, not as a controlling patron, but as an engaged ally. He listened closely when she explained why she'd chosen echinacea for strength, lavender for calm, willow for remembrance. He learned the names of plants. He asked questions that showed he cared. Their relationship grew slowly, naturally, rooted first in shared purpose. They grabbed noodles at tiny local restaurants after long days, arguing enthusiastically about everything from urban planning to tech ethics to old sci-fi novels. He made her laugh, the kind of full-bodied, unguarded laugh she'd thought she'd forgotten how to have. One cool autumn evening, as they walked along the promenade, the Manhattan skyline glittering across the river, Nora looked back at the garden site. "You've given Emma something beautiful," she said quietly. "She'd be proud." "She would," Adrian agreed. He stopped and turned to face her, expression serious. "Nora, when I reached out to you at first, my motives were complicated. I wanted to help you, yes, but it was also about correcting something I'd watched happen to Emma. It was about fairness, about rewriting the story a bit." He gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his touch sending warmth through her. "But that's not what this is anymore," he continued. "It hasn't been for a long time. I'm not interested in your past or in Ethan Ward. I'm interested in you, your mind, your kindness, the way your whole face lights up when you talk about root systems and soil health." Nora's heart thudded against her ribs. "Adrian, she began, but he placed a finger lightly over her lips. "You don't have to say anything," he said softly. "I know you're still healing. I can wait. I just needed you to know where I stand." He didn't kiss her. Instead, he simply slipped his hand into hers, his fingers intertwining with hers, and they continued walking. It was more intimate than that public kiss had ever been. The balcony kiss had blown apart her old life. This quiet, steady hand in hers was the beginning of something new. She wasn't Ethan's ex-wife. She wasn't Adrian Cole's charity project. She was Nora Hale, designer of her own path, standing beside a man who didn't want to dim her light, but wanted to see it shine. And in the newly turned soil of her life, something tender and genuine was beginning to grow. Ethan's world kept shrinking. He lost his corner office, then his title, then his job. They called it restructuring. He knew better. At home, his marriage was little more than tense silence, and occasional fights yelled through closed doors. He and Lila occupied different bedrooms like strangers in a hotel. He was drowning in the consequences of his own choices. And his thoughts turned obsessively back to Nora. In his mind, she was the source of everything that had gone wrong, and also somehow his way out. If he could just get her to forgive him, if he could reconnect with her, maybe he could use her connection to Adrian to dig himself out. One afternoon he went to find her at the garden site. He spotted her easily, standing with a foreman over a blueprint table, gesturing confidently, hair pulled back, boots dusty. She looked more alive than he'd ever seen her, centered, secure. He waited until she finished, then walked over with the most contrite expression he could manage. "Nora," he said softly. She turned. Whatever smile she'd had vanished. Her face settled into calm wariness. "Ethan, why are you here?" "I wanted to see it," he said, waving vaguely toward the emerging garden. "It's amazing. You're amazing. I always knew you had this in you." The lie was almost laughable. "What do you want?" she asked, unmoved. "I want to apologize." He tried to sound sincere. "For everything. I was an idiot, ambitious, blind. I didn't appreciate you. I see that now." He stepped closer. "I miss talking to you. I miss my friend." Nostalgia. His last card. He hoped memories of the early days would soften her, that some leftover loyalty might prompt her to help him. Nora just looked at him with clear, cool eyes. "We were never friends, Ethan," she said. Her voice wasn't angry. Somehow, that was worse. Friends don't slowly dismantle your confidence. Friends don't call your life's work a cute little hobby. Friends don't shrink you so they can feel larger. Each word was precise, cutting cleanly. "You're not here to apologize," she continued. "You're here because your life is falling apart, and you think I'm a flotation device. You think you can use my connection to Adrian Cole like a lever. You still don't see me. You see an opportunity." Ethan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. She'd peeled back every layer of his intentions and exposed them. And she didn't even look angry, only done. "The woman you're looking for," Nora went on, "the one who would have soothed your ego and accepted this speech as if it were enough, she's gone. You broke her. From those pieces, I built someone else." She gave a small shrug. "So, thank you, I suppose." She glanced back toward the crew. "If you'll excuse me, I have work to do." She turned away and walked back toward the center of the garden, already focused on her plans, her team, her future. Ethan stood in the half-finished landscape, surrounded by saplings and fresh soil, the city buzzing distantly around him. The rejection wasn't explosive. It was quiet, controlled, final. A door closing with a soft click. He'd come in search of a lifeline. All he found was proof that he no longer had any place in her story. 6 months later, spring hung in the air, bright and full of possibility. The week before the grand opening, the garden hummed with a very specific kind of chaos. Trucks beeped as they reversed, volunteers hauled mulch and planters, and a small army of city workers tried to pretend they weren't starstruck every time Adrian Cole walked by in work boots and a rolled-up shirt instead of a suit. Nora stood near the central fountain with a clipboard, a pencil behind her ear, and dirt on her cheek. She didn't notice the last part until Adrian reached over and gently brushed it away with his thumb. "You have a whole new shade named after you," he said. "Brooklyn Silt." She snorted. "Very glamorous. Think it'll be on the runway next season?" "It's already in my calendar," he deadpanned. Emma would have loved this. The chaos before the reveal. She lived for deadlines. Nora smiled, feeling the familiar mix of warmth and sorrow that Emma's name always brought. "I feel like she's supervising. Every time I try to cheat on a plant list, I hear this imaginary cough of disapproval." She would absolutely haunt you over non-native species, he agreed. Their shared laugh was cut short by the approach of a woman in a navy blazer with a clipboard that could probably cut glass. "Nora, can we finalize the press walk-through route?" the woman asked. "The mayor's office has some preferences." Adrian lifted a hand. "I'll grab coffee. Want one?" "Always," Nora said. "Something with enough caffeine to keep me from strangling anyone who says, 'Could we just add a few cherry blossoms for the photos?'" "That narrows it down to approximately no one," he replied, and headed toward the temporary coffee cart by the park entrance. Nora turned back to the coordinator, walking her along the main path, pointing out sight lines, potential bottlenecks, places where she wanted people to be able to stop and actually feel the space. "The press will want shots from here," she said, guiding her onto a slightly elevated bend in the path. "You get the fountain, the wildflower meadow, and the skyline behind it. And if you angle left, you also get the sensory garden in frame." The woman scribbled notes, nodding. "Perfect. And the ribbon cutting will happen at the fountain?" "Yes, it's the heart of the design. I want people to move out into the garden from there, not just pose for photos and leave." The coordinator hesitated. "One more thing. There's been some discussion about the speaking lineup. The mayor, the parks commissioner, of course, Adrian. The foundation board wondered if you'd be comfortable speaking after him, not before. Optics and all that." Nora felt a familiar tug in her chest. Old habits, old fears. Invisible first, accessory second. "Why?" she asked, keeping her voice even. The coordinator gave an apologetic shrug. "He's the big headline. If he closes, the press is more likely to stay for the whole program. It's not personal, it's just—" "Optics," Nora finished for her. She looked around the garden. The willow saplings near the pond, the rough-hewn benches in the quiet alcoves, the young magnolia that had stubbornly refused to bloom the day it was planted and then exploded into flowers a week later, like it had been testing her patience. "Then we changed the optics," she said. When Adrian came back with 2 coffees, he found her still standing by the fountain, deep in thought. "There you are," he said, handing her a cup. "Triple shot. Don't say I don't support your more questionable tendencies." She took a sip, then looked up at him. "The foundation wants you to close the speeches tomorrow." He nodded slowly. "Let me guess. Optics?" "Apparently that's the word of the day." He studied her face. "How do you feel about it?" "I feel," she said carefully, "like I'm about to stand in front of the city and talk about the most important project of my life. And I don't want people to think I'm here because of the man next to me." Adrian's eyes softened. "Nora, anyone with a brain can see that this is your work." "Maybe," she said, "but headlines don't always use their brains. And I spent 10 years being somebody's wife. I don't want to spend the next 10 being somebody's girlfriend. Even if that somebody is you." He leaned his elbows on the edge of the fountain, turning so he could fully face her. "Then we fix it. We make it impossible to miss whose garden this is." "How?" she asked. "We start with the speaking order," he said. "You close. I'll go first. I'll talk about Emma, the foundation, the mission, and then I'll introduce you as the person this whole place is actually about." "They won't like that," she warned. He smiled slightly. "They can send me a stern email. I might never recover." She laughed, the tension in her shoulders easing. "You know, one day your board is going to stage a coup." "They're welcome to try," he said. "But they know me. I don't back people as a prop. I back them because they deserve to be in the spotlight." He hesitated, then added, "You do realize I'm outrageously proud of you, right?" Her throat tightened unexpectedly. "I'm starting to suspect." The night before the opening, Nora couldn't sleep. Her apartment was quiet, the city noise muffled by distance and double-paned windows. Plans and what-ifs swirled in her mind. What if the crowd didn't understand what she tried to do with the design? What if the press reduced it to Billionaire's love project and ignored the work? What if she tripped on the dais and face-planted into the fountain in front of every camera in New York? Her phone buzzed softly on the bedside table. A message from an unknown number she recognized anyway. Mom. We're on the train. Your father is pretending not to be excited. He ironed his shirt twice. A blurry photo followed, a shot of her parents on a commuter train. Her mother beaming. Her father looking vaguely alarmed by the selfie process, but wearing the exact plaid shirt he reserved for special occasions. Nora's eyes stung. She typed back, "Can't wait to see you both. Don't let Dad talk you into leaving early to beat the traffic." Another message appeared almost immediately. Too late. He already said it. I told him we are staying until the very end. I want to see you speak. She laid the phone on her chest and stared at the ceiling. She thought of all the years she'd called home and said, "I'm just helping Ethan with some events," or "I might go back to work later." How many times her mother had hesitated before saying, "Are you happy?" Now tomorrow they'd see her in element her, not someone else's shadow. The anxiety didn't disappear, but it shifted, softening around the edges, replaced by a steadier feeling. Readiness. The morning of the opening dawned clear and bright, the kind of light that made every leaf look freshly washed. By the time Nora arrived, the park was already buzzing, event staff checking microphones, city officials rehearsing their talking points, camera crews setting up tripods. Volunteers moved through the garden, removing last-minute tags, brushing soil off stones, refilling watering cans. Her parents were waiting near the entrance. Her mother rushed forward, hugging her so hard Nora almost lost her balance. "Look at you," her mother breathed, pulling back to take in the garden, then her daughter. "You did this." Her father didn't say much. He rarely did in public. But his eyes were suspiciously bright as he cleared his throat. "It's good," he managed, then shook his head as if that word wasn't enough. "It's really something, kiddo." Adrian appeared a few minutes later, walking with the mayor's staff, but he broke away as soon as he saw Nora with her parents. He introduced himself simply, shaking hands, not a trace of billionaire aloofness. "So you're the man who stole my daughter's evenings," Nora's father said, narrowing his eyes just enough to be half serious, half teasing. "Guilty," Adrian replied. "Though in my defense, she was already stealing them for the garden." Her father considered this, then gave a reluctant nod. "As long as you keep backing that," he said, jerking his chin toward the paths and flowers, "you can steal a few dinners." "Deal," Adrian said. The program itself unfolded in a blur. Speeches, applause, flashes of cameras. The mayor spoke first, predictably over his allotted time. The parks commissioner followed, talking about community and green space. Then Adrian stepped up to the podium. He didn't talk about his company or his net worth. He talked about Emma, about her belief that good design could change how people treated each other, about the injustice of how quickly women's ideas got erased. And then he said, "When we started this project, everyone assumed I would be the story. I'm not. The story is the woman who turned concrete into this." He turned, extended a hand toward Nora. "She doesn't just design with empathy, as my sister once said," he continued. "She designs with courage, with persistence, with a refusal to stay small. Please welcome the person whose vision you're standing in, Nora Hale." The applause that followed was loud, but what caught Nora was the sight of her parents in the front row, her mother dabbing at her eyes, her father clapping like he was afraid his hands might fall off if he stopped. Nora took a breath and stepped up to speak, and as she began, talking about the soil, about access, about how every path was designed so a tired nurse or a kid with sensory overload could find a place to breathe. She felt something settle inside her. Not the old fear of taking up space. Something else. A quiet, steady knowing that she belonged exactly where she was. From the outskirts of the crowd, half hidden near the park fence, Ethan listened. He hadn't planned to come. He'd told himself it was pointless, masochistic. But something heavier than curiosity had pulled him there, made him stand in the wind with his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, listening to a life he'd tried to convince her she didn't need. He watched Adrian introduce her not as an accessory, but as the center. He watched her parents' faces. He heard the crowd fall still when Nora talked about growing up in a town with one struggling park. The way that patch of green had saved her on days when school felt like a battlefield. Maybe for the first time in his life, he let himself feel the full weight of what he'd tried to take from her. When the ribbon was cut and the crowd flowed into the paths, he stayed at the edge, out of sight. He watched kids run ahead of their parents, their hands brushing the grasses. He watched an elderly woman sit slowly on a bench like she was lowering herself into a memory. For a moment, he imagined a different version of himself, one who had stood beside Nora on this stage, not working against her in 1,000 quiet ways over the years. The thought hurt, but he didn't run from it this time. He stayed long enough to see Nora step down from the dais, Adrian's hand briefly resting at the small of her back as she was tugged into conversation after conversation. He stayed long enough to see her laugh with her mother, to watch her father awkwardly accept a journalist's request for a quote and then wave them away, embarrassed. Then he turned and walked out of the park, the sound of the fountain fading behind him. He didn't know where he was going exactly, only that for once, it couldn't be anywhere that required a facade. From here, his road would be long and unglamorous. There would be no shortcuts, no last-minute rescues. But as he crossed the street and glanced back one final time at the garden's entrance, he felt the faintest, unfamiliar impulse, not to reclaim the past, to become someone who would never again ask another person to dim their light for his comfort. If Nora's journey from heartbreak to healing and self-worth sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that they are so much more than someone else's opinion, and subscribe for more stories of resilience, growth, and second chances. Which part of Nora Hale's comeback hit you the hardest? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts.